As some European governments stop doing business with illegal Israeli settlements, a British member of parliament tells us why the UK must do the same.
We know that when we want to, we can impose these sanctions. We did it for Crimea occupied by Russia and other parts of Ukraine. We, within weeks, managed to implement a system that we did not purchase any goods from that region.
And the push to uphold international law moves beyond politics. Should sport take a stand where governments have failed?
Football is the most popular game on the planet. When you begin to remove a team from football, not only does it demonstrate that this is unacceptable behavior internationally, it demonstrates to actually Israelis within Israel, you're being removed for a reason.
Hello, I'm Rida Fakhri. Welcome to the program. The European Union is debating banning trade with illegal Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. In a 2024 landmark advisory opinion, the International Court of Justice found Israel's entire presence in the occupied Palestinian territory to be unlawful, calling on Israel to stop settlement activities and evacuate all settlers. The court also called on all states to abstain from economic or trade dealings that would maintain the current situation. Despite deadlock in the European Union, several member states have enacted their own settlement trade bans. The Netherlands announced a ban on settlement goods starting in September, joining Ireland, Belgium and Spain. In Britain, members of Parliament debated the issue in July. The UK government responded by saying it was examining how a ban could be implemented. Shockat Adam, an independent member of the British Parliament, visited the occupied West Bank last year. He has long backed a trade ban and joins us now. Shockat Adam, the Netherlands and Belgium have moved to ban trade with goods from illegal Israeli settlements. Should the UK do the same?
The short answer to that question is yes. I think it's come to a point where we must absolutely ban them, not just importing, but also exporting, and not just goods, but also services.
But is that likely to happen? The UK does accept that Israeli settlements are illegal under international law. If that's the case, should British businesses be allowed to continue trading with these settlements?
You're absolutely right. It's been 50 years since governments and successive governments have categorically stated that the settlements in the West Bank are illegal. Hence, we know it's illegal, and it's our duty to ensure that we follow that through. We've had words for so long, and now, with a new Prime Minister, hopefully, it's pointing in the right direction, but it's the proof is in the pudding, right? And it must be services as well as goods, exports as well as imports.
But how likely is anything to really change? Is the UK at risk of being in breach of international law if it continues this trade?
We saw the outcome of the previous Prime Minister's stance on the whole situation. They're starting to make some apologies that maybe we didn't respond correctly and appropriately and acutely as fast as we should have. Now is the time for action, and we will continue to hold the government to account on that.
Are you confident that the new government will take the appropriate action? And if it doesn't, what message will it send to the Israeli government and to Palestinians?
I'm never confident, but I'm hopeful. And I think it will change. One day it will change, because it has been now a sequence of misdemeanors. It's been a sequence of neglect of laws that we ourselves have created. So, for example, we know that when we want to, we can impose these sanctions. We did it for Crimea occupied by Russia and other parts of Ukraine. We, within weeks, were managed to implement a system that we did not purchase any goods from that region. So we have the know-how, we have the mechanism, we have, as you correctly said, the law also telling us that we must implement this. Otherwise, it will be a travesty of international justice, and we will never be able to look back again and call out injustices like we have done historically.
But what is clearly missing is the political will, isn't it? You were one of just a few MPs calling for greater scrutiny of pro-Israel lobbying groups and influence on British politics. How much has that influence shaped UK policy on Israel?
All we're asking for is consistency here. It doesn't have to be just Israel, because let's be perfectly honest, a lot of people are trying to label this as anti-Semitic when we speak about one country, but all we're asking for is consistency here. And any foreign government, any foreign agents, foreign interference into any other country's politics, and in this case, British politics, must be investigated. So hence we were asking at that particular debate that why the inequity? Why was it then, as a country, I have been extremely proud that once Ukraine was invaded, why did we open up our borders and give homes and safe pathways and give university spaces? And why did we raise a flag above every building that we had? And why did we impose those economic and cultural and political sanctions against Russia?
But the question more specifically is about the level to which pro-Israel groups influence British politics. To what extent do they shape the decisions that come out of 10 Downing Street and the British government on Israel?
Was the inquiry that we're asking for. We're not saying that is certainly the case, but what we're saying is, why is it that when we can, the Prime Minister can say at that time, with full conviction in his voice, that war crimes are being committed? Why can he say that that we can impose sanctions immediately, but we do not see the equivalence during this conflict? So what is it that is happening that means that we're not responding in the same way?
But the question is really about how much you believe pro-Israel lobbying influences British policy on Israel.
The answer is that's what we need to investigate, and we need to find out what influence they do have. When we had that debate in the chamber, it was shut down from the beginning as almost being an anti-Semitic question to ask. As I said before, what we are asking for, to understand why there hasn't been the equivalence in response, and is it because of the influence from the state, from Israeli influence?
How much transparency is there in the British Parliament on policy toward Israel? Because a recently revealed assessment shows that the British government seriously considered suspending trade with Israel last summer. Why wasn't that assessment shared with MPs and the wider public?
That's something that we have raised, and we have signed open letters to that account, including in my question is firms, factories that are making parts that are being used in the murder of innocent Palestinians. Members from those firms were meeting ministers, and I'm speaking specifically here about Elbit, and we have questions to answer. The government has questions to answer. Why is it that you are meeting members from this organization, and what is it? And similar goes to charities as well. Why there is evidence to suggest that there are British taxpayers using gift aid, donating to certain charities which are operating in the illegal West Bank. We need transparency in all of these matters.
And some of these charities you have accused of facilitating the movement of British citizens to illegal Israeli settlements, charities that are getting a tax break from the government. Is that something that continues?
We had a land sale in our capital, in London, a land sale for illegal land in the West Bank. And now we have the government that gives us rhetoric that it is unacceptable, and they believe, as I said, for the last 50 years that it is illegal. Yet there is land being sold on British soil for the illegal land in West Bank. And that is something that we have to hold our government to account. Why are we allowing this to happen?
On the issue of the government considering the suspension of trade with Israel, should Parliament have been told that the government was considering such a significant policy change? And what does the lack of transparency actually tell us about decision-making on Israel?
It has all been cloak and daggers from the beginning, because we get told one thing in Parliament and then something else happens, and that has been a consistent theme since my 2 years being elected. We had, for the first time, a debate which my colleague Abdissam Mohammed, an MP from Sheffield, brought to the chamber, and it was unequivocal. Overwhelmingly, across the chamber, people wanted sanctions, and the government has now a duty, and the new Prime Minister has a duty to ensure that is now implemented.
The new Prime Minister has actually apologized for the Labour Party's initial response to Gaza, and he's promised a tougher response and a tougher approach to Israel. But is it, in your opinion, a genuine policy shift or just a change in tone and rhetoric?
I'm going to give him a little bit more time before I judge him. But this is a continuity of previous prime ministers and previous governments. The tone is different, and we welcome that. But people will only be judged by their actions. So let me give you an example. We had a military expo in Farnborough in the United Kingdom, where firms were exhibiting their military goods, which included firms from Israel. Okay? There was Raphael, there was A2I, and there was Elbit. Okay? And now these firms, when they had the same exhibition in France, were behind a black veil. Yet these were openly presenting their wares in the UK. Now, Andy Burnham said he welcomed this fair and wanted to do business with these like-minded people. Now, maybe he was very early in his term and he wasn't quite sure what was being exhibited there. So I will give him that benefit of the doubt. But we must see actions. We need immediate economic sanctions. We need immediate service sanctions against Israel. And we must see that any charities must be transparent to the reports that they have been accused of straight away. And any red line that must be crossed must be clearly defined by the Prime Minister.
How likely is that to happen, though? When you look at the cabinet members that Andy Burnham has chosen, many senior members of the cabinet are Labour friends of Israel. Does that limit how far the government is willing to go?
And that is something that we will continually push the government on. And we saw that the Keir Starmer's response has led him to leave the parliament. And I'm not saying it was solely because of this issue, but it was a very, very strong reasons. I overturned a huge majority standing on the right side, what I believe it was on the right side of history. Other cabinet ministers came very close to losing their seats fundamentally for this reason.
You've accused the former British government of being complicit in Israel's alleged war crimes in Gaza. Are you saying Britain is complicit morally, politically, or legally?
I think all three. We said never again after World War II, yet we are seeing on our live screens a genocide according to the United Nations Convention happening. We have a duty to ensure a genocide does not occur, war crimes does not occur. Why are we still selling parts of fighter jets to Israel that is responsible for the murder of innocent men, women, and children? We have a duty legally as part of the United Nations, as part of the statute, Rome Statute, that we must ensure a genocide and war crime does not happen. Even if we have no evidence at that time whether it's happening or not, we must do everything in our capability to prevent it from happening. Hence, the fact that we haven't taken those measures. We also have been using, let's say, a second example is we've had surveillance planes there. We've had British aid workers being killed, yet the surveillance planes have not released the information that they hold. Why? Why do we still have diplomatic ties with people? Why have we not ensured that we would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu as per the recommendations? We said the same for Putin. So these are the things that will ensure that we are on the wrong side of history, that we are morally, we are politically, and we are legally responsible for what is happening and complicit in the war crimes.
You visited the occupied West Bank and you witnessed the settler violence against Palestinians, often under the watchful eye of the IDF. What struck you the most?
What struck me the most was that every aspect of Palestinian life was being curtailed, was being abused, was being eroded. Whole towns being closed with thousands of people with absolutely no warning. Culturally, they're being eroded. Every aspect of Palestinian life I saw in the week that I was there, including religious, was being interrupted as well. So there wasn't an avenue of the Palestinian life in the West Bank that was not being controlled and interrupted by the Israelis.
How do you think history, a few years from now, will judge Britain's role and its response to these atrocities in the West Bank, in Gaza, especially given Britain's historical role in Palestine?
We have more duty than most, and as I keep reiterating the fact, we said never again. We were the architectures of the international bodies that we created to ensure we have a fair and just world. And this global justice-based order seems to be collapsing, and Britain will not be looked upon favorably. And we have spent most of our lives, in my lifetime, apologizing for the stance that Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative government took against apartheid South Africa. I feel this will be exactly the same, but on a different scale. We will be on the wrong side of history. We will find that if we do not act sooner, it could even get worse. We must act promptly.
British Member of Parliament Shockat Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
It's not just trade with illegal Israeli settlements that's under growing scrutiny. Israel's participation in major sporting events is also in the spotlight. In 2025, the Football Association of Ireland overwhelmingly backed a motion to call on UEFA, football's governing body in Europe, to ban Israel from competitions, citing violations of the UEFA statutes. But the association's president insisted that Ireland would play Israel if drawn against them in competition, and they were. Now, many in the game are backing a boycott of the matches later this year. Among them is Daniel Lambert, the chief commercial officer at Bohemian FC, one of Ireland's top football clubs. He's also manager of the band Kneecap and joins us now. Daniel Lambert, some European governments are taking action against Israel's illegal occupation, but for most, it's still business as usual. If politicians fail to act, just how crucial is the role of civil society?
Yeah, look, huge power rests with people, and I think we often forget that the governments across the world have abdicated their legal responsibilities, their moral responsibilities, their responsibility to prevent the worst crimes known to humanity. But people, and through some of sports, arts, ordinary working class people, through boycotts, and they hold huge power. And in Ireland, we have had a crucial role in the past in this. We had a group of workers who worked in a grocery store in Dublin in the 1980s, led by a 19-year-old woman called Mary Manning, who helped to bring down apartheid in South Africa by refusing to handle South African goods on a checkout. And that's just one example. And I think that when an artist steps onto a stage, or a footballer onto a pitch, or an actor onto a set, they have huge power, huge profile, and they can do more maybe than they realize. And we should support everybody who does that, because like I said, when governments aren't willing to act, it's up to people, and the real power rests with people.
There was a massive global solidarity movement in South Africa, but are you sensing anything similar on the global stage today when it comes to Israel and Palestine? Are you seeing real change?
I think that what we're seeing, on the one hand, I think it's one of the biggest global movements that there's been in decades against Israeli aggression and Israeli genocide and Israeli war crimes. But on the other hand, what we're seeing is an absolute abject failure, and particularly, I'd say, of the EU. The EU's claims that it represents, a moral position, the absolute refusal to withdraw the preferential trade agreement between the EU and Israel, which is predominantly being blocked by Germany. These are absurdities. The US the US, as we know, has no moral standing anyway, and now the EU has almost no moral standing either. But I do think that the movement of people will succeed, and I think that what we're seeing, we're seeing it in football, we're seeing it in music, and we're seeing it with civil society. And I think that we cannot lose faith and lose hope in that. We can bring about change, and I do think that you're seeing in the US, I think in particular, on the one hand, a further embedding of the US military system with the Israeli system. But also, I think what you're seeing is an awareness, probably a bigger awareness than ever, of the depth of the Israeli lobby. People are more aware of that now than ever, and I think that these things will all converge to a point where we can, where Israel can be held to account.
There is much more awareness, you're right, on a popular level across the world. But what would convince you that we have reached a tipping point?
Well, really, to reach a tipping point, what we need to see is governments act on their legal responsibilities. And these include, for instance, we've seen various countries ignore their responsibilities in terms of the arrest of Netanyahu and other members of the Israeli government who are wanted for war crimes. But I think the EU is where really we should and can and will, I think, begin to see movement. I think Spain in particular has been very strong, and I'm sad to say, and I will say, because the truth, the Irish government does not do enough at all. The Irish government doesn't represent the wishes of the Irish people in terms of Palestine. They say some nice things and they take small steps, but very little concrete action. And I think a hell of a lot more can be done.
What more can be done? I mean, specifically, where do you see the most leverage?
Well, I think there needs to be action taken. It's not enough just to attend a solidarity demonstration. You need to actually take concrete action, or that's the boycott movement. I do think the increase in awareness, though, I think that Keir Starmer's resignation, I think a significant part of that was his absolute refusal, to uphold the UK's legal and moral responsibilities, particularly from somebody who claimed to be an international human rights lawyer in the past.
But are you hopeful that the next government will be any different?
Well, I think if they're aware that that's part of the reason that Keir's no longer in position, then it will change some of their behaviours. I think that look, we should be under no illusion here. The task ahead is massive. It's wrapped up in a military-industrial complex. It's wrapped up in huge finance, and it's wrapped up with the more or less a hegemonic world power in the US at the moment, backing Israel just again inexplicably on every level, financially, militarily, with support, with intelligence, and with threats to other nations. Which is part of the reason that Ireland doesn't do more, because of the role of US multinationals in this country. So there's never been probably a bigger challenge. This is something that, it is a David v. Goliath situation, but I do feel and I do believe in humanity. And there are areas where they can't control what can be said and impact it can have. And like one example of that, obviously, and which I'm close to in terms of managing Kneecap, is the ability of artists when they step onto a stage and they can speak to 40, 50, 60,000 young people immediately, speak to millions of people via social media. Likewise, football clubs and footballers and all that space in music, sport and culture. You can speak to large numbers of people.
How much impact did Kneecap have on the whole discussion, the whole debate on Palestine-Israel?
I think it's hard to overstate it. I think ultimately, when the band went to Coachella last April, it was obviously, it's a huge festival. It's probably one of the most well-known festivals globally and the most well-known in the US. And they went there and decided to speak truth to an audience of young Americans. And what was most fascinating, and I was lucky enough to be at that gig, was the reaction of the young US people in at that gig. They all chanted Free Palestine. They all understood. They all showed solidarity. And that is what absolutely scared the US establishment. It was never about Kneecap. It was never about this band. What it was about was what happens in a space like Coachella, where a band not just hangs a flag on a drum kit. That's better than not doing anything, but it's pretty pointless. That's the acceptable face of solidarity in the US. When you speak out and you say that the US is supporting a genocide and if the US withdrew its support, the genocide stops, which is what Kneecap did, that absolutely terrified them. Because if they lose the young people in the US, then ultimately Israel loses US support.
And of course, one of the biggest stages for people to express their solidarity with the Palestinian cause has been football and the FIFA World Cup. And there's been this intense debate about whether or not double standards can be removed, whether every country can be treated equally. We saw how Russia was suspended from international sport and football. We don't see the same treatment for Israel. Are you optimistic that things could change?
Absolutely not, no. The fact that Iran had to travel from Mexico against the rules of the game is outrageous. The game is governed by some of the worst people on earth, and I don't say that lightly. It's a working class game. It's meant to bring people together, and FIFA and UEFA are a disgrace. And the clearest example is that, as we know, Israel is in breach of UEFA and FIFA statute. It's not my opinion. I've said this before. This is not a subjective issue. It's an absolutely objective fact that they have teams playing on occupied lands, 10 teams. It's not under any dispute internationally. And the penalty under FIFA and UEFA statute for teams playing on occupied lands is suspension and expulsion. It's already written into their statutes. So you have once again this inexplicable position to protect one nation, Israel.
The Republic of Ireland is due to play Israel in the Nations League later this year. Do you believe that Ireland should refuse its fixtures with the Israeli team, even if it means sanctions against Irish football?
Absolutely. Ireland should not play Israel. In Ireland over the last couple of months, and I'm part of a Stop the Game campaign here, we have had a survey of Irish football supporters. 76% don't want the games to take place, irrespective of penalties. These are people who actually travel to Ireland games, fans of the Irish national team. We had a survey of the Professional Players Association, the PFAI here, and I think it was 64% or 63% of professional players don't want the game to go ahead. We have the full backing of all unions in Ireland. And on top of that, we had like an independent survey done of the general population, and it was 56% of the general population. There is no support in Ireland for this game amongst football players, football fans, or indeed amongst the general population.
What's the evidence that these sporting boycotts actually do work and change governments' behaviours?
There's huge evidence to say that they work. We saw with South Africa, there was an absolute sustained system of the removal of South Africa from international sports and wrestling and football across the board. And ultimately, football is the most popular game on the planet. When you begin to remove a team from football, not only does it demonstrate that this is unacceptable behavior internationally, it demonstrates to actually Israelis within Israel, you're being removed for a reason. You need to take action against your government. You need to change what your government is doing. So it has impact on both sides. And I think that, it'll be really sad if Ireland decides to fulfill that fixture. It's already been moved outside of Ireland to Serbia. It should not go ahead, and there is no support for the game to proceed. And we see universal support for the game not to take place amongst the fans of League of Ireland clubs, including our own club here, Bohemians, but every other club in the league as well. And it's something that can have a lot of impact, and it shouldn't take place.
Daniel Lambert, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
A clear shift is underway across Europe and around the world. The demand that Israel's actions carry consequences is growing louder. Although the European Union has failed to reach a collective position, an increasing number of states are no longer willing to wait for consensus. When political leaders refuse to meet their legal and moral responsibilities, the burden shifts to civil society, from sport and culture to academia and business. History has repeatedly shown that meaningful change is often driven not by governments, but by the people. That's all from me, Rida Fakhri, and the team. Thanks for watching.